When a dying settler woman meets a Lakota hunter on the Nebraska plains of 1864, his impossible proposition shatters everything she believed about survival, love, and the price of crossing forbidden boundaries. Their union will birth more than a child. It will challenge an entire territory's definition of civilization itself. But when the cavalry arrives at her door 9 months later, will Martha choose the safety of surrender or stand with the man who saved her life? The prairie wolves howled like hungry ghosts across the Nebraska territory in 1864, their cries mixing with Martha Caldwell's empty stomach growls. She pressed her face against the cold window of her dirt house, watching snow pile against the door like a white wall trying to keep her trapped inside forever. 3 months had crawled by since her husband rode away, chasing gold dreams in the Black Hills. He promised to return before winter bit down hard, but winter had already sunk its teeth deep into the land. Martha's food supplies sat nearly empty in wooden boxes that mocked her with their hollow echoes. Her thin fingers traced frost patterns on the glass, while wind rattled the wooden frame around her. The nearest neighbor lived 15 miles through dangerous territory, where hungry animals prowled and unfriendly tribes sometimes raided lonely homesteads. Martha had heard terrifying stories about what happened to women left alone on the frontier. A sudden crash outside made her heart jump like a startled rabbit. Something large had knocked over her water bucket, sending it rolling across the frozen ground with metallic clangs that cut through the howling wind. Martha grabbed her husband's old rifle from above the fireplace, though she had never actually shot anything bigger than a prairie dog. She crept toward the window, keeping low so whatever lurked outside couldn't see her moving. Through the frosty glass, a massive shadow moved between the bare trees that surrounded her tiny home. The shape looked too big for a wolf, too quiet for a bear, and too deliberate for any ordinary animal that might wander onto her property. Martha's hands shook as she checked if the gun held bullets. Her husband had shown her how to load it, but her nervous fingers fumbled with the cold metal parts. Outside, the shadow stopped moving completely, as if it knew she was watching and wanted her to make the first move in this deadly game. The wind suddenly died to complete silence, making every small sound seem loud as thunder. Martha could hear her own breathing, fast and scared, fogging the air in small white puffs. She could hear snow crunching under heavy footsteps that circled her house like a predator studying its prey before striking. Then came 3 slow, deliberate knocks on her wooden door. Not the frantic pounding of someone running from danger, but the patient tapping of someone who expected to be invited inside. Martha's throat went dry as desert sand. She had not seen another human face in weeks, and now someone stood at her door in the middle of a snowstorm. The knocking came again, still slow and steady, still patient. Martha realized she faced a terrible choice: open the door to discover what waited outside, or hide inside until whoever it was decided to break down the door anyway. Martha's hands trembled around the rifle as heavy footsteps moved away from her door toward the side window. She held her breath, waiting for glass to shatter or wood to splinter. But instead came a voice that rumbled like distant thunder across summer plains. "Woman of the dirt house, I bring no harm to your dwelling place." The words carried a strange accent that made them sound like music mixed with winter wind. Martha had never heard English spoken this way before, with each word chosen carefully like precious stones placed in exactly the right spots. She pressed herself against the wall beside the window, afraid to look but desperate to see who spoke. "Your husband's horse returned to Fort McPherson 5 days past," the voice continued. "Riders found his body in Lakota sacred grounds where white men should not walk." The rifle slipped from Martha's numb fingers, clattering to the floor like her hopes falling apart. She had known deep in her heart that something terrible had happened, but hearing the truth spoken out loud made her legs go weak as water. A massive figure stepped into view outside her window, and Martha gasped despite trying to stay quiet. The man stood taller than any person she had ever seen, with broad shoulders that blocked out the gray sky behind him. Dark braids hung past his shoulders, decorated with feathers that caught what little sunlight managed to pierce the storm clouds. He wore clothes made from animal skins that looked warm and practical, nothing like the fancy uniforms soldiers wore or the simple cloth garments her husband preferred. This stranger belonged to the wilderness, in ways that made Martha feel like a lost child who had wandered too far from home. "I am called Tall Bear by my people," he said, turning to look directly at her through the glass. "I have watched your smoke grow thin, Your movements grow slow. Death walks close beside you now. Martha wanted to deny his words, but her empty stomach and dizzy spells told a different story. She had been rationing her food so carefully that meals had become tiny portions that left her always hungry. Her reflection in mirrors showed hollow cheeks and eyes too large for her face. "Why do you care what happens to me?" she called through the window, surprised by how weak her own voice sounded. Tallbear moved closer to the glass, and Martha could see his face clearly for the first time. Weather had carved lines around his dark eyes, but they held kindness instead of the cruelty she expected from the wild stories people told about Indian warriors. His presence felt dangerous and safe at the same time, like standing near a controlled fire on a cold night. "Because the earth speaks to those who listen," he replied. "She told me about a woman who fights to live when others would surrender to winter's hunger. She told me about strength that bends but does not break." Martha stared at this impossible man who spoke about the earth like it was a living person with opinions about her life. Everything she had been taught said she should fear him, run from him, never trust him. But something in his steady gaze made her feel seen and understood for the first time in months. Martha's hands shook so hard she nearly dropped the coffee cup. 3 days had passed since Tallbear's shocking words, and she hadn't slept more than an hour at a time. Every shadow outside her window looked like danger. Every sound made her jump like a startled rabbit. But something strange was happening to her body. The constant ache in her stomach had disappeared. The dizzy spells that made her grab onto furniture were gone. For the first time in weeks, she actually felt hungry when she woke up. Tallbear appeared at her door each morning like clockwork, carrying fresh meat or wild berries. He never pushed his way inside. He never demanded answers to his proposal. He simply left gifts on her doorstep and waited nearby, close enough to help if trouble came, far enough away to let her think. "You're getting stronger," he observed on the 4th morning, watching her walk without stumbling. Martha touched her cheek, surprised to find it less hollow than before. "I don't understand how." Hope is powerful medicine. Tallbear's dark eyes studied her face with the intensity of someone reading an important map. But hope alone won't survive winter. The truth hit Martha like cold water. October was nearly over. Soon, snow would trap her inside the sod house for months. Her food supplies wouldn't last 2 weeks, let alone until spring. Her husband had taken their only horse, their only gun, and most of their money when he left for the goldfields. "What exactly are you asking of me?" Martha whispered, though part of her already knew. Tallbear stepped closer, his massive frame blocking out the morning sun. "I'm asking you to trust me with your life, to let me teach you how to truly live on this land instead of just surviving on it." Martha looked around at her failing homestead. The garden was mostly dead weeds. The roof leaked in 3 places. The walls were cracking as the ground shifted with the changing season. Then she looked at Tallbear, who had somehow made her feel safer in 4 days than her own husband had in 2 years of marriage. "If I say yes," she asked carefully, "what happens to who I was before?" "You become who you were always meant to be." Martha closed her eyes and made the choice that would change everything. When she opened them again, Tallbear was holding out his hand. She took it, feeling calluses that spoke of honest work and strength that could protect her from any storm. "Teach me," she said simply. The smile that spread across Tallbear's face was like sunrise after the darkest night. Martha realized she had just signed a contract written in faith instead of ink, bound by something deeper than law or custom. Winter came early and fierce that year, but Martha had never felt so warm. Tallbear proved to be the most patient teacher she'd ever known, showing her skills that transformed her from a helpless widow into someone who could actually survive on the harsh prairie. "Your people build houses that fight the earth," he explained while helping her weave grass into thick mats for insulation. "Mine build homes that work with it." Martha's fingers fumbled with the weaving technique at first, but Tallbear's huge hands guided hers with surprising gentleness. Within a week, she could create weatherproof barriers that kept the wind from cutting through her walls like knives. He taught her to read animal tracks in the mud, to predict weather changes by watching how birds flew, and to preserve meat using methods that would keep them fed all winter long. Most importantly, he taught her to see the prairie as a living thing that would take care of her if she learned to take care of it. But the lessons went both ways. Martha discovered that Tallbear had always wanted to learn reading and writing, In the evenings by firelight, she taught him letters and numbers using her father's old Bible and her mother's cookbook. "These marks tell stories?" he asked, tracing words with his finger like they were sacred symbols. "Every mark has meaning," Martha replied, watching his face light up with understanding. "Just like your tracking signs." Their child grew stronger inside her with each passing day. Sometimes, lying in bed at night, Martha would feel tiny movements that reminded her this baby was part of two worlds. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. But trouble was brewing 15 miles south in the settlement. Mrs. Patterson from the trading post had been asking questions about the extra smoke from Martha's chimney. Why was there suddenly a second horse in her corral? Who was helping her with repairs that she couldn't possibly manage alone? "People are starting to talk," Tallbear warned her one snowy evening. "Some of your neighbors think you're hiding something dangerous." Martha placed her hand on her growing belly, feeling their child respond with a firm kick. "They're right. We are hiding something dangerous. We're hiding love that crosses lines they're afraid to cross themselves." Tallbear pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her like a shield against the whole world. "Are you ready for what comes next?" Martha thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, scared, alone, slowly dying of despair. Then she thought about the woman she was becoming, strong, protected, carrying new life that would bridge two worlds. "I'm ready for anything," she said, and meant it completely. Outside, the wind howled like a warning, but inside their transformed home, two people from different worlds continued building something entirely new together. Thunder rolled across the prairie as 20 soldiers surrounded Martha's home like wolves circling their prey. Colonel Hayes stepped down from his horse, his boots hitting the mud with a sound that made Martha's heart race. 6 months pregnant and fierce as a cornered wildcat, she planted herself in her doorway. "Mrs. Caldwell," Hayes spat her name like poison, "we know what you've done." Martha's hand moved to her growing belly where the baby kicked hard, as if sensing danger. "I haven't broken any laws, Colonel." "Haven't you?" Hayes smiled without warmth. "Helping enemy Indians is treason. The punishment is hanging." The soldiers raised their rifles. Martha felt her world tilt sideways. Behind her, she heard Tallbear moving quietly through the house. He was getting his weapons ready. "Enemy?" Martha's voice cracked like a whip. "The only enemy I see rode here on government horses." Hayes's face turned red. "That savage has filled your head with lies. Where is he hiding?" Before Martha could answer, Tallbear stepped into the doorway behind her. His massive frame blocked out the sun. Every soldier tensed, fingers moving to triggers. "I hide from no one," Tallbear said. His voice carried across the prairie like distant thunder. "Especially not from men who make war on women and unborn children." Hayes laughed harshly. "War? You call this war? This is justice, Indian." "Justice?" Martha stepped forward until she stood shoulder to shoulder with Tallbear. "You abandoned me to starve when my husband left. This man saved my life. He gave me food when I had none. He fixed my roof before winter came. He treats me with more respect than any white man ever has." The wind picked up, whipping Martha's skirts around her legs. Storm clouds gathered overhead like an army of their own. "Respect?" Hayes sneered. "Is that what you call this shameful arrangement?" Martha felt something powerful and dangerous rise in her chest. "I call it love." The word hit the soldiers like a physical blow. Some looked away. Others shifted uncomfortably in their saddles. Tallbear's hand found hers. His fingers were warm and steady. "Love does not recognize the color of skin or the language of prayers," he said quietly. "Love only asks, will you stay when staying is hard?" Hayes pulled his pistol. "Enough speeches. You're both coming with us." "No." Martha's voice rang clear as a church bell. "I won't go anywhere with men who think a woman's worth depends on who approves of her choices." The baby kicked again, harder this time. Martha smiled despite the guns pointed at her heart. "This child will be born free," she continued. "Free from your narrow minds and cruel judgments. Free to love whoever deserves that love." Thunder crashed directly overhead. The first fat raindrops began to fall. Hayes cocked his pistol. "Last chance, Mrs. Caldwell." But Martha had already made her choice months ago when she first took Tallbear's hand. Lightning split the sky as Martha stared down the barrel of Hayes's gun. Rain began falling harder, turning the prairie dust to mud. 20 soldiers waited for orders that could end 2 lives in seconds. "You think that gun makes you powerful, Colonel?" Martha asked. Water ran down her face like tears she refused to shed. "I've seen real power. It doesn't come from weapons or uniforms or the ability to destroy what you don't understand." Tall Bear stepped slightly forward, shielding Martha with his body. "Your gun can kill us," he told Hayes calmly, "but it cannot kill what we represent." "And what's that, Savage?" "Hope." The word came from Martha, soft but unbreakable. "Hope that different people can find common ground. Hope that love is stronger than fear. Hope that children can grow up in a world better than the one we inherited." Hayes's gun hand shook slightly. Behind him, his soldiers exchanged uncertain glances. These weren't the words they'd expected from a woman they'd been told was a traitor. "Pretty words," Hayes said, "but words don't change facts. You're a white woman carrying an Indian's child. That makes you a disgrace to your race." Martha laughed, and the sound surprised everyone, including herself. "My race? Colonel, I belong to the human race. The only race that matters." Young Corporal Wilson, barely 18 years old, lowered his rifle slightly. "Sir, maybe we should—" "Shut up, Wilson," Hayes snapped. But doubt had crept into his voice. Tall Bear sensed the moment shifting. "You came here expecting to find monsters," he said to the soldiers. "What do you see instead?" The men looked around at Martha's thriving garden, the well-maintained house, the peaceful homestead. This wasn't the savage camp their commander had described. "I see a pregnant woman standing in the rain," Wilson said quietly. "I see a man protecting his family." Hayes whirled on his subordinate. "You see what I tell you to see." "No, sir." Wilson stepped forward, his young face determined. "I see what's really here." Other soldiers began nodding. Sergeant Murphy, a weathered Irish immigrant, spoke up. "Colonel, my own wife was called a disgrace when she married outside her people. Love doesn't follow military orders." Hayes's control was slipping away like water through his fingers. "You're all fools. This woman has betrayed everything we stand for." "Everything you stand for," Martha corrected. "I stand for survival, for building something better than what came before, for raising a child who will see possibilities where you see only problems." The rain intensified, soaking everyone to the skin, but nobody moved to take shelter. Tall Bear placed his hand on Martha's shoulder. "Our child will know both worlds," he said to the soldiers. "They will speak both languages, honor both traditions, bridge gaps that bullets cannot cross." "That child is an abomination," Hayes shouted. "That child is the future," Martha shot back. "A future you're too frightened to imagine." Wilson made a decision that would change his life forever. He stepped between Hayes and the couple, facing his commanding officer. "Sir, I won't shoot a pregnant woman. Not for this. Not for any reason." One by one, other soldiers joined Wilson, creating a barrier between Hayes and his targets. The colonel found himself alone with his hatred and his gun. Screams pierced the midnight air as Martha's labor pains came faster than summer lightning. Tall Bear's hands shook as he lit another candle, knowing their child refused to wait for the midwife's arrival. Outside their cabin, coyotes howled like they sensed something important happening under the October stars of 1865. "The baby wants to come now," Martha gasped, gripping the wooden bed frame until her knuckles turned white. Sweat poured down her face despite the cool autumn air seeping through the cabin walls. Tall Bear had delivered foals and calves, but never a human child. Never his own child. He knelt beside her, placing one massive hand on her forehead. "Breathe, like the wind through tall grass," he whispered in Lakota, then repeated it in English. "Slow and steady." Martha tried to follow his rhythm, but another wave of pain crashed over her like a river breaking through a dam. "Something's wrong," she cried. "The baby isn't moving right." Panic flashed across Tall Bear's face before he forced himself to stay calm. He'd watched his grandmother help women give birth back in his village. Sometimes babies came feet first, like they wanted to dance into the world instead of dive. "Turn onto your side," he said gently, helping her shift position. "Let gravity help our little one find the right path." Hours crawled by like wounded animals. Martha's strength faded with each contraction, but Tall Bear never left her side. He sang ancient Lakota birth songs his mother had taught him, melodies that seemed to calm both Martha and the restless baby. Just before dawn broke over the Nebraska plains, everything changed. Martha's eyes widened as she felt the baby shift inside her. "Now," she whispered. "It's happening now." Tall Bear caught their daughter as she slipped into the world, tiny and purple but breathing strong. Her first cry split the morning silence like a war whoop of victory. He cleaned her carefully with soft cloth, then placed her on Martha's chest. "She's perfect," Martha sobbed, tears streaming down her exhausted face. The baby's skin showed the beautiful mix of both parents, darker than Martha's pale complexion, lighter than Tall Bear's bronze coloring. She would belong to both worlds and neither, creating her own path between them. "What do we call her?" Martha asked, stroking the baby's damp black hair. Tall Bear smiled, his voice thick with emotion. "Winona in my language. It means firstborn daughter, but she needs an English name too." Martha thought of her own mother dead these past 10 years. Hope. Winona Hope Caldwell. As if she understood, the baby opened her eyes and looked directly at her father. In that moment, Tall Bear knew this tiny person would change everything. She carried both their bloodlines, both their stories, both their dreams for a better tomorrow. But outside their warm cabin, the world waited with its harsh judgments and cruel laws. How long before someone discovered their secret? 5 seasons passed like pages turning in a book nobody wanted to finish reading. Little Winona Hope had grown into a chattering 3-year-old who switched between Lakota and English words, like a bird hopping between tree branches. She called butterflies Kimimela and asked for more jam on her morning biscuits, making both parents smile at her mixed-up, perfect way of speaking. Martha stood at their cabin door, watching her daughter chase fireflies in the summer evening of 1868. The child's laughter bubbled like creek water over stones, pure and joyful. But that joy felt fragile now, like soap bubbles that could pop with the slightest touch. 3 days ago, riders had passed their homestead, heading toward the settlement. Martha recognized one face, Colonel Hayes, the same man who tried to arrest her years before. He'd been transferred to a fort in Kansas, but apparently he'd returned with new orders and old grudges. "We need to leave," Tall Bear said quietly, joining Martha in the doorway. His usually calm voice carried worry like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. "My cousin sent word from the reservation. The government wants all mixed families to register their children." Martha's stomach dropped like a stone in deep water. Registration meant separation. It meant sending Winona to a boarding school where they'd try to scrub away her Lakota heritage like dirt from clothes. It meant losing everything they'd built together. "Where would we go?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "North, to Canada. My uncle lives near a trading post where mixed families aren't hunted like criminals." Tall Bear's jaw tightened. "It means leaving everything behind. This cabin, your garden, the graves of your parents." Winona ran up to them, her small hands cupped around something precious. "Look, Mama, I caught a lightning bug." She opened her palms carefully, and the firefly blinked once before flying away into the darkening sky. "Sometimes we have to let beautiful things go so they can stay free," Martha said, kneeling to her daughter's level. The words carried more weight than a 3-year-old could understand. But someday Winona would remember this moment and know why her parents made the choices they did. That night, after Winona fell asleep between them, Martha and Tall Bear made plans by candlelight. They would take only what they could carry: clothes, tools, the small wooden horse Tall Bear had carved for Winona's first birthday. Everything else would stay behind like memories frozen in time. "Are you sorry?" Martha whispered as they packed their few belongings. "Sorry you chose me over a simple life?" Tall Bear stopped folding clothes and looked at her with those deep brown eyes that had first seen her worth when she couldn't see it herself. "The only thing I'm sorry about is that the world isn't big enough yet for families like ours." 3 mornings later, as the sun painted the Nebraska sky gold and pink, the Caldwell family loaded their wagon and headed north. Winona waved goodbye to the fireflies, not understanding she might never see this place again. But in her parents' hearts lived the certainty that some journeys led to better destinations, even when the path looked dark and uncertain. Behind them, their empty cabin stood like a monument to love that refused to follow society's rules. Ahead lay Canada, freedom, and a future where their daughter could grow up proud of both sides of her heritage. Would they make it across the border before Colonel Hayes discovered their escape?